So hello, BookTube. This is the BookTube newbie tag. The first question is, why did you start this channel? Now, I'm just going to give you a recap for those of you who may remember me, those of you who don't. I started this channel in April of 2018, and my reasoning was as follows. So when I was in school, we only studied foreign literature. Foreign meaning only British and American classics. I'm South African, if you can tell from my accent. Growing up, I loved reading, so it didn't matter what I was reading, I was happy. I think I just had a natural tendency towards that, and so things were easier for me in a way that they weren't for other kids. So anyway, I loved my Roald Dahl, I loved Enid Blyton, and obviously as I progressed in age and the books progressed in complexity, we did things like The Great Gatsby, The Lord of the Flies, and one could argue that something like Great Gatsby deals with very universal themes. So issues of class consciousness, old money versus new money, that kind of thing. Wonderful, great. But something like Lord of the Flies, it's problematic because the way the boys landed on the island and essentially destroyed and ravaged the entire island was a form of settler colonialism, which is not something that either the book interrogated or the syllabus interrogated. This didn't deal with issues of gender at all, which is funny because I was in an all-girls school studying this book about how boys are so destructive. But again, there was no gender critique within that, which I just think it's such a profoundly political decision. And it's a profoundly political decision to completely omit South Africa's national literature within our syllabus. What are we doing as a nation? Before I get into my politician like rants, um, let me also contextualize by saying 81% of our grade 4 students, so this is children who are approximately 10 years old, cannot read for meaning. So they can look at a passage, they can extract the words, they can say the words out loud, but they cannot comprehend what they have just read. So essentially, they are functionally illiterate. When I go to a 10-year-old child today, I just feel very profoundly sad for that child because what in literature is reflecting their experience? Where, I think as a nation, as part of South African nation building, we need to be a lot more conscious about uplifting African authors, South African authors, these kinds of experiences. Because when you teach literature, you're not teaching books, you're not teaching words, you're teaching things like empathy, you're teaching things like morality, how to interrogate oneself, you're teaching critical thinking, which today in a world of AI, doom scrolling, all of these things, empathy is profoundly lacking. Media literacy, critical thinking, all of these things, that is why we read. That is what I'm doing on this channel. That is why I started the channel, because I myself was not educated on my own national literature, so it was my journey to educate myself and along the way educate others, of course. But I'm not here to preach. I'm not an expert. That's not what we're here for. It's a journey that we go on together. So in the same way where maybe I'm educating you, but you can also educate me all the time in the comments. So I started this channel obviously to champion South African literature on this platform. I ended up going on just an extended hiatus. Part of that was because of personal reasons, just a difficult living situation where it was just not possible to continue the channel. The other reason was BookTube is a community. So like every other BookTuber, I got involved in that community. I made friends, I connected, I encouraged, I supported, I tried to lift up other people in the same way I had been lifted up by some just fantastic individuals. I had been mentored and just seen in a way I had never been seen before. BookTube was transformative for me. However, there was a sexual harassment perpetrator who was doing the rounds around BookTube. And I had filmed a lot of videos and I was championing a lot of different channels, and I just didn't want to be associated with this perpetrator in any way. And so I deleted a lot of my videos. I didn't really have the capacity to go through each one and sift out whether I had mentioned this perpetrator or not. And it just left me feeling quite unsettled. So this being unsettled, it didn't last. So my hiatus wasn't fully because of that. My hiatus was mainly because of personal reasons, which have now dissipated. However, I do think it's very sad that this perpetrator, it's resulted in a lot of women leaving BookTube. and essentially never coming back. So again, I will just say my channel, wherever possible, I just want it to be a place where we are safe, all of us. So anyway, all my political rants aside. Question 2, what are some unique, fun and unique things that you can bring to BookTube? So my perspective is that I'm South African, so I'm from the global South. I'm from a place where it tends to be underrepresented in literature. But again, it's not, for me, it's not just about South Africa only. It's about Pan-Africanism. Because within South Africa, we've also got this serious issue of xenophobia, where other African nationals, so black African people who might be fleeing from war-torn countries, like Eritrea, Rwanda, all of these places. Again, it's not always that. Sometimes people are leaving for economic reasons and they've migrated to South Africa purely for economic reasons, not as refugees. But, foreign nationals here are stoned to death, burned to death. Political populism wants to paint them as the problem. Economically, we cannot afford, so many refugees. Again, one wonders, so many refugees. We have a population of 60 million people, and the amount of refugees is maybe 250,000 at most. This is not like somewhere like Uganda or Rwanda, where again the amount of refugees is quite large and is quite significant. So for me on the channel, xenophobia is not acceptable here. It's about that Pan-Africanism and about lifting each other up more than anything else. So fun and unique things, it's my positioning as a South African person, but again, I want to highlight the African continent, or just all of it. Again, you find male voices tend to be louder. So again, even when you do see from the global South, then a lot of the time you do see male writers and that kind of thing. I'm also South African Indian. So you can see from my ethnic makeup that I'm not maybe what people consider to be the typical African look. So I'm 5th generation South African Indian. I've been here since British colonial rule. So my family was brought here through the indentured, one could say, slave trade, I suppose. So it's a very similar history to Fiji, Mauritius, Trinidad and Tobago. Jamaica has a similar history where ethnically Indian people are there and have been there for many generations because of that indentured slave trade, so to speak. So Dutch Guyana, it was Dutch occupation, then there was British occupation, whatever it was. So anyway, that does bring a unique perspective from my side in terms of issues like race, where within South Africa, a lot of the national dialogues are this black and white dichotomy, but it's a lot more than that. It's a lot deeper than that. So some unique things is, again, my perspective, I suppose, from my nationality, but not just my nationality, just the way that I think. A lot of people have pointed out to me, you just notice so many details. So again, it's not surface level identity politics. Let me just put it that way. For me, it goes much deeper than just your surface level identity politics. Okay. So question 3 is, what are you most excited for? I'm excited to mentor other people, to not necessarily mentor, but just uplift. So I aim to be a positive presence here, not to tear other people down, not to get involved in those kinds of demeaning aspects, which they do exist online. Generally, it's not such a problem on BookTube, but for me, I want to be a positive presence. BookTube, again, if I could scale it up, and this is something which I was thinking about back in 2018, 2019 when I was active, is I would love to highlight South African literature in a lot more of its entirety, in a very well-rounded way. So again, with 11 official languages, I was trying to get a friend who was Xhosa to come on here, speak about Xhosa culture. I've seen Sotho, Venda, Tsonga cultures are not highlighted quite as much in terms of like the SABC, which is our national broadcasting, not as much as, for example, Zulu culture, which again, Zulu is the majority, so it makes sense that it's highlighted more. But there are a lot of nuances that get lost and flattened when you look at a lot of our national media, on our national broadcasting. So on this channel, I would really like to highlight those perspectives within South Africa, because South Africa is so diverse. So Yes, I can come here and I can say, no, I'm a South African booktuber, but I don't represent the entirety of the country. The only thing I can do is give a platform to other people who can come and speak on things where I can't speak on them. My fiance, so we are different cultures, obviously. Okay, that's not obvious, but anyway, the two of us come from different cultural backgrounds, different employment backgrounds, that kind of thing. He's been very enthusiastic. He says he'd love to come and appear on here. So it's this channel, I wanted to not just be my soapbox, so to speak. I want to highlight other people from South Africa. So if you're a South African booktuber, come, let's collaborate, let's chat, let's highlight different perspectives on this channel. And again, it's not about agreeing. We don't have to agree. It's just about having those voices out there, having those expressions out there. And this issue of literacy within South Africa is really something that I would like to somehow address on my channel. You know, maybe I can pair with publishing houses in South Africa, sure, great. But maybe I can do much more meaningful outreach, and maybe this channel will just be the first stepping stone to getting there. So I really want to do something to assist with literacy in South Africa, but I'm not a school teacher. You know, there's teachers where they've got 40 years of experience, which is just so priceless and invaluable. I'm never going to be at that level. We're going to have to wait for another couple decades before I can get there. You know, I'm a lawyer by profession, so I might need to stick in my box in that sense. But hopefully through this channel, I'll be able to support and uplift literature, literacy, critical thinking, all of these different things within South Africa. That's my focus. But I suppose most of my viewers are going to be from the United States, which that has been in the past. So again, let's see. That's my vision at the moment. I'm just excited to highlight literature and highlight lots of different voices on my channel. Okay, so question 4 is, why do you love reading? Okay, so I love reading because it allows you to escape into other people's inner worlds, to maybe understand your own inner world better. You get a sense of camaraderie, of mentorship when you might be in a more, I don't know what's the word, but secluded locality. So again, you might not have access to people that you connect with, but you can connect with the characters through books. You can connect with the author's ideas. So growing up, I wasn't really exposed to other writers. There just wasn't anyone who did that. And so books gave me that camaraderie and that mentorship when I didn't have it in person. So again, you can extend that metaphor however you want to extend that metaphor. Question 5 is, when did you start reading? And just like everybody else, 5, 6, as long as I can remember. What book got you into reading? Again, I think I always took to reading. I just took to stories. So I would be watching my Barbie movies and all of that. And again, just really got immersed within the stories. Books that were read to us when we were kids, it was like Enid Blyton, Magic Faraway Tree, these kinds of things. I think for me, a Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling was very much a turning point where I was 10, 11 years old. I just thought I could see myself having a literary life, so becoming an author myself. It was just the immersion of the world, the characters, those kinds of things. And again, I just want to say very clearly and very explicitly, I do not condone the transphobic comments. So question 7 is, what kind of books do you like to read? So much as I've used previous examples that are mostly fiction, I generally read non-fiction these days. It's not a value judgment, or there's no morality associated. I don't think one is superior or inferior or anything like that. That's not the point. I just think that non-fiction very much satisfies my curiosity. So if I'm curious about a particular point of psychology, for example, I can find that answer in non-fiction. In fiction, you are exposed to human psychology, but again, it unfolds as the story unfolds. So I go to fiction for a very different reason than I go to non-fiction. And again, I just happen to go to non-fiction a lot more. I am a lawyer, so I read a lot of non-fiction for my career. So I read journalism, politics, these kinds of macroeconomic and macroscopic issues, because I'm very interested in specifically legislative reform. Again, this is a very long story, but I started in the health sciences, so I was specifically studying a pharmacy degree, and I became active in like the student volunteering. We had a vegetable garden on the university premises, and that was for the students who were on food subsidies. So as much as they got things like your maize meal and their staples, they didn't have any fresh produce. So we specifically wanted to meet that need through our on-campus veggie garden. And through this society, which was called Inala Society, which is, it means abundance in isiZulu, we learned about leftism, socialism within that, the academia. So that kind of leans into the kinds of books that I like to read. I like to read philosophy, leftism, these kinds of sort of problem solving issues. And I got into legislative reform and an interest in that when I was doing my pharmacy degree and we were studying the Pharmacy Act. So we had an assignment where we had to go to a pharmacy that we were working at and we were doing our hours, and we had to audit them based on a checklist which was created by legislation. And this was when I really saw how powerful legislation is in shaping human behavior, but not just human on an individual level but on a collective level. So it meant that every hospital was held to the same standard, every pharmacy across South Africa. And again, that's when I started to just think bigger and about the kind of impact that one can make within a career. In pharmacy, I found the work to be very repetitive, and it just wasn't significant enough intellectual stimulation for me. The work was drudgery, repetitive, and that was not something that suits my temperament. So I began to think that legislative reform would be the way to go for me, because it really means applying one's mind. Within pharmacy, I did enjoy being in the labs, but again, research is not really what most pharmacists do. If I'm going to look at a spread of pharmacists and who is a researcher, I don't know, 20%, if that. Maybe that's a bit of a generous figure. So again, I just felt that I needed to be in a career where I would apply my mind. So in terms of legislative reform, it's important to know not only the legislation as it now stands and the history of how it came to be like that, but you need to know about where people's lived experience is, where the legislation is, and where is the gap between the two, so that you can make submissions to Parliament. You can use NGO findings, class action lawsuits, case law, politics, journalism. You need to draw from a lot of different sources for something like legislative reform. And again, that is the direction that my reading goes in. Okay, where do you read? Now, for me, this is like, why is this question here? But then at the same time, that's actually quite pertinent, because so I have, obviously, like most 9-to-5 workers, I have a commute. So I do love music, but I also listen to audiobooks. Again, they can be debate about, is that real reading, is it not real reading, whatever. I don't care to get into that and how that's ableist even as a question. So I read on my commute because I am the one driving the car. I also read ebooks, so if I'm at work and there's a spare moment, I'll be reading on an ebook. I also, this is much more seldom, but I have physical books at home. Yeah, so I read all over the place because it's just such a part of who I am that I need to be reading something at any given moment in time. Question 9 is, what does your book collection look like? And I do have a separate video. It's called Forget Aesthetics, Your Bookshelves Are Allowed to Be Messy. That is on my channel, so you can have a look. What does my collection look like physically? What is the variety of authors? What authors am I drawn to? All of those kinds of questions is answered in that video, and I just don't want to be repetitive. So question 10 is questions to ask your favorite booktubers. A lot of my favorite booktubers from back then, because again I started in April of 2018, a lot of them have actually disappeared. So I think in a way it's sad, but in a way also we all have to go through a level of discovery process. So some people might join it and find that BookTube is not for them for whatever reason. Some people who I talked to cited the performativeness of the platform. And this was back in 2018, before Book Talk and all of these things. So, performativeness of the platform, lack of depth, lack of critical thinking, these kinds of issues. So that's kind of the reasoning as to why they left. And again, most of them have never come back. So I think, yeah, I don't know. I think I would ask my favorite booktubers how they navigate BookTube and remaining consistent over time. Because for me, the aim is not to just be here for 1 year and disappear. I was here for longer than a year in 2018, and then again I disappeared more due to personal reasons and not necessarily just because of the platform itself. But I do think consistency is something that takes a lot of dedication, and I really have admiration for that, for making BookTube a priority within your life and keeping it up. The other thing that I'm also very interested in regarding BookTube is, who doesn't want to get paid for what they love, doing what they love? And I love reading. I love talking about my reading. I love the communal aspect of BookTube. There's so much about it that I love. I would love to be championing literacy in a more meaningful way within my life. So again, as a lawyer, there isn't necessarily that capacity, but I do feel that potential within myself to be able to contribute to literature within my lifetime. So again, I would like to know from booktubers about things like monetization and how they went about doing that, and how they managed to make BookTube a more permanent fixture within their lives. I'm not sure that I've seen booktubers do what I would like to do, which is again be almost like an interviewer, be a sort of vessel for these kinds of more maybe political discussions, I suppose, about reading, the direction of reading. There is a Dua Lipa podcast, which she's fantastic, and she does talk about these issues. So again, to my favorite booktubers, how do you go about interviewing people, choosing people to interview? Because my aim here is not to just highlight famous people and the famous person's name is in the thumbnails, or the face is in the thumbnail, and so that's why people click on it. I think I do want to highlight lesser known perspectives within South Africa, and the way to go about that is by highlighting people who are not necessarily well known. So again, to booktubers that I know, or favorite booktubers, how do you go about highlighting these perspectives? How do you go about finding these perspectives? Do you connect on social media? Do you see like an interesting voice on Substack and then see if they're close to you, or how do you do that? I think would be my question. Okay, and then question 11 is the challenges to overcome. So I think in my previous BookTube newbie tag in 2018, I said something to the effect of, finding the time, because again, I was a busy pharmacy student at that time. And I think that was the challenge I anticipated, but it ended up not really being a problem because I just loved BookTube so much. So I would really find that time, and I would be setting aside that time. So again, when you love something, you make it happen. So again, I'm not sure what my challenge would be this time. The reason why I left was, again, personal reasons that were outside of my control. So challenges to overcome, I think, would just be that consistency of just trying to be here each and every week, once a week. That consistency is just important for building that rapport and that community that BookTube is all about. Because again, if I'm only here once every 5 or 6 months, it's difficult to create that real connection between me and you as the audience, and as people who also might want to be my friend outside of just me sitting on this platform. Maybe you want to reach out to me on email or Voxer or whatever it is, and it's so difficult to do that if the uploads are sparse. So again, for me, I think the difficulty would just be consistency. So I'm going to end the video here, and I hope you have a lovely day.